I think that, I mean, I've been saying that for a long time, that we live inside a black hole, and the things that are in it are just smaller black holes that we're on the outside of. And, actually, recently, another physicist from Indiana University has come up with similar conclusion, wrote a very good paper on it. And I think people are the scientific community is starting to realize that it's not as straightforward as it appears. And the reason I've been saying that is that if you can divide things to infinity, then everything is a black hole because everything has singularity at its center. And so, basically, and then when I took the mass of the universe that we observe and I put it in the size of the universe we observe, it obeyed the condition of a black hole, meaning it's too dense for light to escape it. Yeah. And you might say, well, too dense. The universe doesn't look very dense. I mean, there's a lot of space out there, but you got to realize that it has to do with the size of the system. So you can think of a light being like a laser light being shined from here. It would be curved a little bit by the gravitational field of the sun, and then another star, and then another star, and another star, and it would come back. It wouldn't. There's too many. There's too much mass for it to actually escape. So it, was telling when I found this, when it supported the concepts that I was bringing forward, and I was very interesting. But I think that the current popular concepts of black hole is incomplete. So when I'm saying we live inside a black hole, I like to think of it black hole, WHOLE, instead of,
complete.
Yeah, complete,
yes,
with the whole,
yes.
Meaning it's embedded from infinitely big to infinitely small. It's not just one entity that is bizarre, that's absorbing everything, but it actually absorbs and radiates information in a continuous feedback. So it's a black hole, white hole. The black hole being in the center, the white hole being on the edge. So if that's correct, if we were to get out of our universe and look back at it, it would look like a star.
Yes.
It would have a radiating part. Now we're inside the black hole, so it's black. But we're outside of smaller black holes that we call stars,
yes.
Or that we call galactic centers, or that we call, suns and so on. And according to me, all atoms as well. So we're on the outside of the atom, so we see this point that's emanating energy, electromagnetic fields, magnetic moments, and so on. And it appears solid, and it appears, that you can't put your things through other things, but actually it's mostly space with a little boundary of energy that's bouncing off each other.
Yes.
Like I was saying in the conference, is that there is a possibility of infinity, from infinitely big to infinitely small, and so movement is not so obvious, meaning that you can't isolate the movement of my hand, for instance, from A to B, and assume that that's everything that's happening, because my hand is not in a closed system, it's in an open system. So as my hand moves from A to B, I have to calculate the rotation of the Earth during that time, and add that speed to my hand, and then the rotation of the Earth around the Sun, and then the Sun around the, in the galaxy, in the cluster, in the cluster, in the supercluster, and so on. And now my hand is moving at, eventually if I keep adding those speeds, my hand will be moving at the speed of light from A to B. So then you start to realize, wait, that's not how it happens. My hand is actually appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing in sequence. and it makes it appear to move. And basically this appearing disappearing act is actually occurring because the vacuum has all the information, and it knows where everything is. And so my hand informs the vacuum of where it is, and then the vacuum informs it of where it's going, and then back to where it is and back to where it's going. And it's happening at the speed of light. So like a movie, you don't see the spaces between the frames. You just see continuous motion. So all of a sudden you realize, wow, we're actually warping space-time every billionth of a second in our lives. We're constantly doing this. So it makes sense that a person with a certain level of mastery could actually get their atoms to disappear here and reappear there, and skip all the parts in between.
Could you nearly say that if my hand is here and now it's here, that it's a different my hand?
Right. Your hand is constantly undoing itself and redoing itself. Your body is constantly undoing itself. The whole world the whole universe is constantly undoing itself and redoing itself at different scales. So, for instance, that I was talking at the subatomic particle scale, but, you could look at it at the biological scale. And in 7 years, you will have undone yourself and redone yourself. And almost all the cells of your body will be new cells that, weren't there 7 years ago. So, in one way you can see this dynamic happening at different fractal level of the scales. Yeah, I think quantum physics is attractive to spiritual people because there's that whole part about the observer and the influence of the observer on the experiment and all this. And so that's attractive to the spiritual people because it gives them a sense that, they may be correct, that consciousness is important in the equation. I think that's all true. I just think that quantum physics is extremely incomplete, and that it's a dangerous thing to start interpreting quantum physics that way. And in fact, the equations I wrote in this last paper, which is quite simple, shows that you can treat the atom almost completely classically or semi-classically with Einstein field equation, and you don't need much quantum physics. Although I think that the uncertainty principle occurred because we're dealing with mini black holes that are connected to all information in the universe. So there's an uncertainty because there's infinite amount of information, present. So it's uncertain exactly where that particle is. It could, there's a percentage of probability that it could be anywhere else in the universe. Or if you pinpoint it down and you can tell where it is, now you're not sure exactly where it's going. I think that still applies to the black hole atom. It's just that not in the context of current quantum theory. And so, I basically kind of got rid of a big chunk of quantum theory that actually I thought was very ad hoc. And this is why Einstein didn't like it. He thought there was some fundamental mechanics at the bottom of the atom, at the base of creation, and he didn't think that, it's good enough to just say it's a bunch of probabilities and you can't visualize atoms because it's nothing like the real world. It's nothing like the real mechanics we see in the universe. And I don't agree with that. The universe is made out of atoms. Most likely it's got fundamental mechanics that we can actually visualize and understand. Well, a long time ago when I was starting to bring this knowledge to the physics community, the reactions were not always very pretty. I had all sorts of mishaps. And, I think throughout the years, many of the things I predicted early on started to be found out. I predicted we were going to find black holes at the center of all galaxies. I predicted that black holes were there before galaxies. I predicted that you know, sunspots were vortices towards the center of the sun, not just surface events. And many things I said start to come through. And so some of the physicists that at first, you know, were having serious issues with me start to, you know, be more friendly and all this. And eventually, you know, I got into a group of physicists that are working on these more esoteric and more difficult issues in physics, you know, not just the stuff that's known, but the stuff that we don't understand and that, you know, really needs work. And so eventually I was invited to present a paper at this conference, and as an invited paper I was able to say what I wanted, you know, pretty openly. And so my paper, first of all, my paper was very simple, meaning I made it very, like, as simple as I could, which, you know, in some ways, you know, that as well upsets some physicists because it doesn't have enough detail. They have to kind of fill up the blanks. But I wanted it simple because I wanted anybody with a little bit of background in math to be able to follow it and not just add complexity. And what it said was that atoms are black holes, that, you know, the vacuum has an important role to play in their creation, that the vacuum connects them all, and all this. And so it was pretty radical, and I was a little nervous going to that conference thinking, I don't know what they're going to think about this. You know, I could get a lot of tomatoes thrown at me. And so when the director of the conference pulled me aside and said he wanted to talk to me, I thought, oh, no, I'm going to, you know.
Get me over here.
Yeah, and he asked me to stay for the award presentation because my paper had won the best paper award. I was very happy about that. You know, it was great. It is a small award. It's not a Nobel Prize, you know, and it's in a conference that, you know, is multidisciplinary. The award is for the physics section of the conference. So it was great. I mean, I was really happy about it. And, you know, I think that much more work has to be done on that paper to complete to like fill up the blanks for people. And so it's created some upsetness in the physics community, but I mean, if it wasn't new, if it wasn't unusual, then you know, it would be the same as everybody else. So in one way, the fact that that people are getting upset out there is an encouraging fact. It's showing that you know, maybe there's something valid there, and that you know, that you know, changes are difficult. People have to realize it's normal when you've got 150 years or you know, 120 years of quantum theory in history. You know, one simple paper saying that most of it is incomplete. Is not gonna, they're not gonna just throw it out and go with my view right away. But I believe that eventually they will. I believe that eventually they will realize atoms are mini black holes. They can be dealt with classically. And the reason they have all this esoteric behaviors like entanglement and you know, very uncertainties and so on is because we're dealing with black hole dynamics.